on earth, still do. And it's sad to see that finish, you know. You know you're never going to be able to recreate it. And you know also once it's broken up, it'd be very hard to, it's like a broken saucer, a broken mirror. There's like, just not going to look the same when you put it back. And there's a lot goes on when something like that shatters.
Well, it's 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get ready, now go, cat, go.
It gives me great pleasure to be here tonight to induct Paul McCartney into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
It's 4 decades now since the birth of the Beatles, but the impact the Fab Four made on our culture is still as strong as ever. A new generation of fans made the compilation of hits #1 the fastest selling of all. It is McCartney who tops the bill at the biggest benefit concerts. A year is not allowed to pass without Sir Paul picking up an award.
So I want to say to you all, thank you very, very much. And this one's for you, baby.
But despite all his fame and all of his achievements, the full extent of McCartney's contribution to our culture could well be actually underrated. It's because the spectre of John Lennon is a hard one to shake off, and there's a conventional way of looking at the Beatles' story that says John was the innovator, Paul the cute songsmith, and there's bad blood between the two. The truth is very different.
There was a timing. You know, timing is of the essence, and people look at it saying post-war, the baby boom, we were ready to show off. Our parents had all been a bit inhibited by the war. It's going to inhibit you. We didn't have any of that. We'd had none of that shadow over us. So we were like ready to rock.
As everyone knows, the birth of the Beatles was in Liverpool, but the real birth of the Beatles' music was in Hamburg, because it was in Germany that the sound that singled them out from the hundreds of other Merseyside groups was created.
In the early days, the Beatles were regarded as the savage young Beatles. They were, for instance, in Hamburg, was all prostitutes there, all girls every night. There was taking Preludin, all these pills like amphetamines and things. There was getting drunk all the time. It was really seedy. And the seediest place probably in Europe, the St. Pauli district of Hamburg.
The decision to go to Hamburg was taken by the man credited as giving away the Beatles, their first manager, Alan Williams.
The move to Hamburg came about through the Jacaranda, and I was managing the Beatles then. So that's how the Beatles came to play in the basement. We had no stage in the Jacaranda, they just stood in a corner. And next minute, George came up and said, "Can we borrow the brush and have you got a mop?" And so I went down, you know, when we started to play. And you know what they wanted the mop and the broom for? They hadn't even got mic stands. And these girls were sitting there all night with the mics tied to the end of the broomstick and the mop. That's how poor they were in those days.
I got the phone call around about August 1960. And it was from Paul. Paul made the initial approach. And it was basically, "Pete, we've had the offer to go to Germany. Would you be interested?"
We took the chance and we drove over to Hamburg. We stopped at a famous war cemetery in Arnhem, and we had our photograph taken on the cenotaph there. And it's on the cenotaph, it says, "Their names liveth forevermore." And this was the first time the lads had gone to their professional engagement.
It wasn't an adventure, it was a complete change in life. You've got to remember we were 17, 18 years old. Went in through the back door of the bank. So, John, I think, was the first to go, and George was the second, and Stu. Followed by Paul and myself. Now, those three got the palatial suite. They got the middle room with the electric light bulb, the camp beds, right? Paul and I got the black holes of Calcutta, you know, which would really, I think they must have been concrete bunkers.
So, I think the other thing about Hamburg was that it was your first really professional thing, because you actually had to attract people in I always think that was one of the most important things. We'd be playing, and there'd be hardly anyone in the club, and you'd see a couple of sort of young people, like a young couple, just look in, and they'd first of all look at the price of the beer, and you'd sort of see them go, no, and they'd go out. So we started to know, God, you know, the beer's too expensive. And so when they ducked in next time, we go, well, what'd I say? Yo, come on, yeah, you know, really, come on in.
The Fab Five, John, Paul, George, Stuart and Pete, played in the club for up to 8 hours at a stretch, honing their music and adjusting the power structure of the band. McCartney was fiercely ambitious for the group and determined to get the best out of their limited musical talents.
I remember going over to Hamburg and seeing Stuart Sutcliffe playing on stage. And when I looked at his lead, it was out. Paul McCartney used to pull his lead out. And the poor lad would be playing. So I realised then your days are numbered, you know. And it sure was.
A chance meeting with art student Klaus Voormann changed the Beatles style. But more importantly, it changed Paul's attitude. It exposed him to a group of people with a lifestyle completely different to his own background.
The first thing was the music, because I heard it through the window when I was out. Just a cellar window, you look down and you just hear that music. And the second thing was the way they actually acted on stage, which was amazing, just amazing. It's impossible to explain.
We learned a lot of our skills, how to be sort of tough and how to play and how to sing a lot so your voice never went, because, you know, we sometimes had to play a lot of hours in Hamburg, and you kind of got used to it. You just, everything toughened up, and you got back to England, and a couple of hours was like nothing. It was like dossing around, you know. 2 hours? Oh, thank you, you know. We were used to more like 8 or something, you know. And it meant also that we had a big repertoire.
They were jumping up like crazy, like really making lots of things happen on stage, laughing and screaming. They got a little bit out of control. They had competitions who could drink a whole crate of beer and who would stand longest on stage before he falls asleep. Pete Best, I think, was falling asleep playing drums once.
We'd been just Liverpool guys. Then we were Liverpool guys set free in Hamburg, and with our crocodile mock cardboard, actually, crocodile-looking pointed shoes, and we was very much still sort of Liverpool guys. But we met up with Klaus, Astrid, Jürgen, who were the main three, and we couldn't believe their look. It was like, you know, I say there used to be people coming in the club and we'd be enticing them in, but when these people came in, it was like, oh, look at them. Because we were like, wow, you know, they look so cool. And they had their hair sort of down, a little bit like a Beatles style. Astrid had this blonde thing, and then she was a very thin girl and had this sort of black, and it looked great. And they all kind of wore black a lot. And they were sort of studenty, which we liked. We thought it was a really cool look rather than just Teds or rockers or bikers. The studenty look was like a very different look, European, really cool look. So we started to become very enamored of them and the look. And I think it had a big effect on us. I know it had a big effect on us.
Well, there is Paul, who's downstairs in the basement with a toilet woman, and he's buying of her pepper pills, like, you know, Purple Hearts, those sort of things. And they played all night, and even the bosses came up and said, hey, why don't you take some of those and you feel much better, you feel happy, come on.
With their bohemian lifestyle and devil-may-care attitude, it was only a matter of time before the Beatles ran into trouble with the Hamburg authorities. McCartney and Best were arrested for starting a small fire in their lodgings.
Paul and I didn't know what the hell was going on. You know, you're in deep sleep. These, you know, German guerrillas come along and basically sort of turn around and say, you know, McCartney and Best, bang, you know, skull dragged down the stairs all the way down the top 10. And, you know, interrogated at the back of the, you know, the police station. I always remember looking at Paul's face. I'm certain he must have been looking at mine, and there was this look of horror on our faces, you know, as the gates of the jail opened up. You know, and it was like, my God, they're locking us away and no one will see McCartney and Best evermore, like, you know.
The The Hamburg episode was central to the Beatles' story. It changed the pecking order of the group. Stuart Sutcliffe, much to McCartney's liking, stayed behind in Germany, while the others came back to wow Merseyside with their newfound confidence and power. Within weeks of their return, the Beatles were no longer bottom of the pile in Liverpool. The crowd's reaction to the band at one seminal concert had the first flickerings of Beatlemania.
The music started, and the whole dance floor just moved basically down to the front of the stage, and just stood there, mesmerised, you know. And then all of a sudden there were just like these screams from the girls in the audience, you know. A couple of fellas as well, but mostly girls.
Hamburg had given Lennon and McCartney's music its foundation. Now, with Brian Epstein as manager, what had seemed a hobby now looked like becoming a career. The Cavern's DJ, Bob Willer, could tell that no one realised this more than McCartney.
Ambition really fired Paul more than it did John Lennon or even George Harrison. He was determined his songs would emerge from it, and indeed I was given a list of 99 songs that they used to feature at the Cavern, and only about half a dozen of them were Beatles songs, and most of them were by Paul McCartney.
Now, when Brian Epstein took them over, he didn't want them to have all this leather gear or be rough. What Epstein was doing in some ways was effectively changing it from John Lennon's group into Paul McCartney's group. And John Lennon always resented this when people were thinking, oh, I always preferred the Stones, you know, the Beatles with the Liverpool mop tops. But really, Lennon's group were a rough, rowdy bunch, and they were great.
We all had the, you know, jacket with a little sort of collar and hats and the long overcoats and the things. So we looked like a group. It was actually something I'd seen years before at Butlins. And I'd always thought, God, it's so cool that when you see four people dressed alike. It's like a uniform. It's like the effect of seeing sort of sailors who just got off a boat or something. There's just something, the camaraderie immediately comes across it.
After Hamburg, the Beatles resumed their local gigging in Liverpool with a vengeance. But this spurt of recognition from their home fans hardened McCartney's resolve to get to the top, even if it meant that not everyone would make the journey.
We had Pete Best as our drummer for Hamburg and everything. But when we went to do a record deal, George Martin wasn't that impressed with Pete. It was sad, really, you know. But there were just little differences, little subtle differences. And we'd seen Ringo, and we really admired Ringo. We actually thought Ringo was the best drummer in Liverpool. And then the first night we played with Ringo, just something clicked, you know, and we're all like looking back and going, ooh, looking at each other going, oh, something's happening. And it was, you know, it was like just that was the first little germ kicking in.
With a new drummer, the Beatles went on to conquer the world. McCartney, though, never forgot his roots. The world's press enjoyed the Liverpool accents, but the marks left by Merseyside went far deeper than that.
When we think of John and Paul as the two basic men of the Beatles, sort of right at the beginning, and people think of the aggressive John Lennon and the working class hero and everything, in fact, it was Paul who had the sort of existence in the council flat thing with moving from council premises to council premises, while sort of John had this middle-class upbringing, nice place in Menlove Avenue with garden front and back and a beautiful sort of suburban-type setting. It was really Paul who was the working-class hero, not John, you know, in actual fact.
I think the other thing, in truth, you know, that I think people forget, is we weren't that well off. So like anyone, you wanted to make money. So to us, there was suddenly this other escape, because we weren't very good at football, didn't want to go to sea, didn't want to join the army. So it became another escape route, and a kind of glamorous one, you know, so we just thought, we'll have a go at it.
Paul's mother had died when he was about 14. Now, he's terribly vulnerable, as anyone is at that age, and Jim McCartney had to be a father and a mother to those two lads, that Paul and his younger brother.
It was therefore inevitable that in many people's minds, the Beatles became another family for McCartney. And in Lennon, he found a soulmate with a common bond.
It was 1956, and it was the Woolton Fete, and John was playing as the Quarrymen from his school, Quarry Bank. But that was the day that Paul turned up.
First of all, I met John at the village fete. Then I thought he was a bit of a slob. He was a, boozy breath. Hey, oh. I thought, oh yeah, oh dear, he's a bit not very cool. But I liked his music and I liked his attitude and stuff. So I got to like him, and I always looked up to him.
I think Paul was sort of taken with John and overawed by him at the same time. And in fact, he's since said that he didn't know if he could keep up with this fellow. When they practiced in whichever house would have them at the time. So it was either our house or Mimi's house or Forth Lynn Road, which was Paul's house, whoever wasn't in, or whichever bathroom was empty. And my mother died in 1958. And one of the things that, when Paul was coming, that she was sad about was that Paul had lost his mother. And I remember her saying, how sad, that poor boy's lost his mother, how awful. And he ate with us a lot. And it was just total irony that she died herself the next year. They had the common bond in losing their mothers, very much.
Lennon and McCartney's closeness was echoed in everything they did. In the early days of the Beatles' global success, they proved an unstoppable double act.
We really were each other's support all the way through the Beatles' career. I always say we were the four corners of a square, and you need, without one of those corners, it collapses. And we were really four good corners, like you said earlier. You couldn't have hoped for four better corners, more, couldn't hope for more support in every way, sort of morally, artistically, lovingly. There was a lot of everything in that square,
First it was Liverpool, then England, and then the world, as the Beatles took America by storm. For Paul, it was the realization of a dream.
Yeah, it was the big one, to go to America. It was the place we were in awe of, and I think it's the place most people are still in awe of.
The event that transformed the Beatles into the planet's first real superstars was an historic appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show.
It was really big. It was the biggest thing we'd ever done. It was nerve-wracking kind of thing. Although looking at it, it doesn't look like we were the least bit nervous. My dad always used to say that. I said, God, we did this TV. He said, we're so nervous. He said, I couldn't tell, I could never tell. And looking at it now, I see what he meant. But we were pretty nervous, especially when the floor manager came up just before we went off, before the curtains opened, because it's like a live show. And he said, there's 70 million people watching or something. I'm not even sure if he knew it was 73 in the end. But he said something like, there's 20 million people watching you. Good luck, guys. But we held it together. We'd had enough practice, Hamburg, we'd done enough gigs. We knew we couldn't blow it. This is one time we couldn't blow it. And I had to sing Yesterday solo with a string quartet, But we did it. We just held it together. Those big occasions we kind of rose to. And then afterwards, people started saying, do you know how many people watched that? And it got some sort of record. I think it's still held.
Liverpool was too small by now for the Beatles, and so they moved to London. The city gave the group the platform they needed to fulfill their potential, and it also gave Paul McCartney a new arena to explore his growing artistic awareness.
Paul, he preferred to mix in with the set that Jane Asher had, which was more the kind of legitimate theatre crowd, the fashionable people. He enjoyed theatrical first nights or theatrical parties, mixing with artists, in fact, not of the theatre, but artists. He really wanted to know a wider range of things about the arts.
John was a tearaway and an avant-garde person, but in a way he was kind of educated into it by Paul, because in the early days, when John was married to Sin, he was fixed up with a very nice house in Weybridge in Stockbroker Belt. He used to go home to the wife, and it was a fairly conventional existence, while Paul was staying in town and went to live with a family, the Asher family, in Wimpole Street. And he was at the centre of London art.
coming back to London, it was in full swing. And all the artists were there. And if you, as you say, I lived with the Ashers. And theirs was a really nice, free household. Very intelligent people, kind of quite upper class for me. But I loved it. I loved, you know, the way they'd like play games at dinner. It was all very intelligent, you know, so you had to really, I just loved it. You know, it seemed really cool for me. And they had very organised lives. It was very sort of sophisticated lives. You know, Jane was an actress, so she'd be off in the morning doing go see her agent, doing a lunch with someone, doing an audition or rehearsals and all that. Her dad was a doctor, so he'd be seeing patients or going to the hospital, so on and so on. So Mum was an oboe teacher, so she'd be teaching or doing this, that and the other. They had packed days. I'd never known anyone who started at 8 and like finished at like 9. And they just knew what they were going to do all the time. So it was good for me. I kind of, it helped me organise, get a bit of a structure.
I imagine our household may have been somewhat different from his. I mean, it may be too easy to emphasise cultural differences. I mean, I suppose at the time, that far back, they would have been perceived as class differences, but you don't say that anymore now. At that time, the rock and roll scene and the avant-garde scene, I think, got somewhat fascinated with each other. Everyone was fascinated by the Beatles, of course, because they were so infinitely talented and glamorous. And, you know, there was nobody who didn't want to meet the Beatles. That's what made it all so interesting, that from the royal family to the most avant-garde American artist, everybody wanted to meet them. But I think that the two worlds did interweave to some extent. And Paul, I think, more than any of the other Beatles, was particularly interested in those aspects of things. He took aboard some of the ideas that he got from reading William Burroughs and stuff, or from listening to avant-garde music, or being made aware of Stockhausen and stuff, which he was. I think he took some of those ideas on board, and some of the more avant-garde aspects of the Beatles' music clearly stemmed from some of that.
With Jane, I was then exposed to the National Theatre, and, you know, with other mates of mine outside of that family, then I started to go to art galleries, which are all there in London, and develop friendships with artists of all kinds, music, painting, kinetic art, all sorts of things, writers, poets.
I think Paul McCartney was always wanting to stretch himself, always wanting to widen the horizons. He was the one who was always coming up with ideas and concepts. Every time there was an album to be done, he'd be sketching and trying to do what the album covers would be like and this and that. He was the very first one to get involved in avant-garde films, and he made a couple. He even got the director Antonioni to have a look at his films and things. But he was into all that. When he encouraged the Indica bookshop, he even designed their paper.
Definitely inspired by like that sort of feeling. I want to hold your hand, and she loves you. It's right in that area, and they did definitely influence my songwriting right away. We went to see A Hard Day's Night initially because we were mad about the Beatles at that point. We were just totally in love with the sound, and I was hearing folk music chord changes in the songs, and I was going, "This is great stuff. I love this," and some of the other folk singers I knew weren't getting it. They were going, that, you know, it's bubblegum rock and roll stuff. And I was going, no, there's something here. There's something really good here. You know, this is some real music. And I started taking it apart for them and saying, like, look, they're fourth and fifth harmonies, you know, and the chord changes. Listen to these passing chords, like they're doing, like, all these really cool passing chords. I said, no, this is really good stuff. And gradually some of them got it, you know. And then I went out to the West Coast and we got the Byrds together based around it.
The influence on the West Coast went full circle. Tomorrow Never Knows is held up as being a classic example of Lennon's experimentation, but its most distinctive sound, the tape loops, are all McCartney's.
It was John's song that he'd done after having read Timothy Leary's take on Tibetan Book of the Dead. And so it was very far out, you know, it was very poetic, very ancient and trippy. I did suggest that for the solo, because the song was so trippy, that we tried this tape loop thing. I'd been experimenting, so I'd be listening to a lot of radio, going to a lot of weird concerts, not weird actually, but it could be said to be weird, of Luciano Berio, people like this, electronic music. Tomorrow Never Knows, I brought plastic bag full in of these loops, and then we made some up in the studio and had them all on machines. We got machines from all the other studios, borrowed them all, fed them all through the desk, and then just mixed them like a modern remix. You know, just brought the faders and cut them out. And so it was a different sounding solo. It suited the song, you know.
Paul's induction into San Franciscan life left a marked effect. More than Lennon, McCartney embraced the idea of the alternative culture, hanging out in Haight-Ashbury, dropping acid, and jamming with the Jefferson Airplane.
He was just doing his thing. He was trying to stand out, and like everybody else, had heard of San Francisco, which was blossoming and blooming at that time with all the stuff that probably later turned up on Sgt. Pepper in its own way. And I think McCartney, as mellow as his reputation may be, was an extraordinary communicator with music, and made emotional moments that related and reflected, maybe more importantly, all of our lives.
They made rock and roll art. They made it really high art, and they were the ones who opened it up and took us to this next level. And there have been very few people who've even come close to what they achieved. And in the short period of time that they recorded and worked, the body of work that they created is the most important body of work that's been created in the 20th century for popular culture, and will be here for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years.
McCartney's craziest collaboration was with Brian Wilson. Paul had always admired the Beach Boys. When they met, he discovered Brian was now playing piano in a sand pit and filling the studio with vegetables.
He came in with Derek Taylor to a studio that we were in one night in 1967, and it was on that night that he played for my wife and I, She's Leaving Home. My wife cried and everything, it was a bunch of tears, you know. But when he walked in, he had these beautiful patent leather shoes, red patent leather shoes, and a white suit. He looked so cool, you know. And we said, "You want some vegetables?" We were cutting a song called Vegetables. We were all chewing on vegetables just to get the mood. And he started chewing on a carrot.
Vegetables. I don't know, man. I don't know. There might have been substances involved. It might have happened. I don't know. I don't remember it all, I must say, particularly some of those dark nights in LA. You know, you just sometimes would fall out of a car into a room. It would be very dark, and I'm not sure if I remember it. I did visit a couple of their sessions, but I don't remember eating vegetables. I'm sure I might have.
Melodies. Do I like his melodies? Yeah, I love his melodies. Are you kidding? I think he was versatile. I think he would start out one day, he might go and say, "Yeah, I like that." And then the next day he might go. And I think what he does is he threw a whole bunch of different kinds of songs at you, and we're supposed to figure out where they're all coming from. You know, I mean, he was very, very versatile as a singer and a songwriter.
I think they were all incredibly inquisitive about what could be done. They were always coming to me, Paul in particular, saying, "What new sounds can you give us? What instruments don't we know about?" And of course, he'd heard something over on a television show. I think he'd seen, or maybe a radio program, I can't remember. It was a Brandenburg concerto, and he'd heard this very high trumpet sound which Bach used, a Bach trumpet. And he came to me and said, "Great sound." He said, "Could we use it?" Said, "Yeah, sure, you can if you want to." And that led to Penny Lane.
In 1966, the Beatles decided to give up touring. Candlestick Park in California was their last ever show. McCartney decided that something was needed to fill that void.
We got fed up with touring. We were losing our music, and we were getting more and more fame, but we were losing our souls, really. And after a famous thing in America, we'd all got really pissed off. We just quietly said to ourselves, you know, we won't tour, we won't tell anyone, but let's get in the studio. We'll make a record, we'll send that out. It'll be the same. People will be able to hear where we're up to. So Sgt. Pepper became that. It's like our message, it was our postcard.
He had been setting up this idea for Magical Mystery Tour, which was going to be a fairly ahead of its time progressive comedy film, zany comedy film, a kind of an update on the Goons or whatever. And it was mostly Paul's idea. Paul had planned it all out. And just as all of this was coming towards fruition, Brian Epstein died at the end of August in 1967.
We suddenly didn't have a manager with the death of Brian Epstein. And Brian was a father figure. There was that security behind us. When he died, there was an insecurity there, a big hole. And so we started talking about getting Mr. X to try and fill in. We wanted like a manager or a business manager or someone who could take care of that. And in the end, we thought, no, we better do it ourselves.
Within days, Paul was fully into the organising of the shooting of Magical Mystery Tour. And a lot of people thought that this was him being rather callous, scarcely waiting for Brian's funeral before gathering the Beatles together for this. In fact, he had quite serious motives for doing so. On the one hand, he genuinely feared that if he didn't kind of put them to work very quickly, that they might never work again as a band.
Making it was great. It was in this sort of artistic, let's see if we can make a film thing. And we literally just sat around, talked a few things, I always used to draw a circle and divide it up and put bits here and move them around.
Magical Mystery Tour was very much a Paul enterprise, right? He called me up and he said, I've got an idea, I want to make a film. And he drew this cake on a piece of paper. You know, he made, and he said, right, that one can be so-and-so, that one can be so-and-so, that one can be so-and-so, and we're going to have genuine old age pensioners on the coach, some underprivileged children, possibly with their mums and dads. He said, we'll make it a genuine coach trip.
We just got a bus, which was the Magical Mystery Tour bus, got it painted, and just set off, and just said, okay. And I would have meetings in the evening. It was kind of my responsibility, really, because I was very much into doing that, and so I just took the responsibility. I'd have meetings in the evening with the camera guys, sort of say, okay, now, what did you think you got today? Oh, we got some great shots. Okay, tomorrow, let's do this, and we'll try and do this. And we just made it up as we went along, which, you know, it looks like, but it has great freedom. And what I like now is that, like you said, there is a reevaluation. It's okay now. And people like Spielberg were looking at it in film school. So, you know, I like to think that it was there and it showed you how free you could be. It didn't necessarily show you how to make a good film, but it showed you could be free. I think that's a big part of it.
As with the avant-garde influences on Magical Mystery Tour, the Beatles became our pathfinders in other ways during the 60s. Paul became something of a cultural magpie, picking and mixing from the rich offerings that surrounded him. No adventure captured the media's attention more than his brush with transcendental meditation and the so-called giggling guru, the Maharishi Yogi.
So we went off. We first of all went off to Bangor in Wales, where we had a little study course. And then we eventually went off to Rishikesh in the Himalayas, foothills of the Himalayas.
When I arrived there, I found that we'd all brought our guitars and that we needed a break. Ringo had some tablas brought in, George brought in some Indian instruments, and we'd spend most of the evenings sitting around. This became 2 sets of songs. I wrote Hurdy-Gurdy Man album and they wrote the White Album. This song, Blackbird, may have come out of the fingerstyles that we were all playing and I was teaching John. In Paul, the song seemed to come out with a wistful longing.
Around that period, because we were in this very artistic environment, meeting various people, drugs came in, you know, first of all, pot, really. And we'd never done anything like that. We were just, you know, northern drinkers. But various friends of ours were into this and that, you know. So, because we liked the friends so much and we kind of trusted them, we thought, well, it can't be that bad or whatever. You know, we got into it. And it was liberating. And it was a movement anyway. It was like, you know, Vietnam was going on, so so many of our friends were American and were getting killed out there. So the peace movement was big at the time because there was a real immediate need for it. So it was all that kind of thing, and it all mixed in with the whole culture, and it changed the culture. It just became something else. And we readily took part in it and enjoyed it, you know, and it was good for our music.
In 1969, another major influence on Paul became evident. It came from left field, and a liberal, highly educated background, the Eastman family.
It was a relationship which in its early stages none of us really believed. I mean, we had seen Paul in a number of short-term relationships during and immediately after his long love affair with Jane Asher. But Linda Eastman wasn't seen as being his long-term partner at all. I mean, he actually proved to us all that we were the ones that were wrong, and she was right for him and he was right for her.
Paul, what's it feel like to be married at last?
It feels fine, thank you.
What are you going to do now? Is it going to change your life much, do you think?
I don't know, really. I've never been married before.
The wedding was about an hour late starting. Everyone got a bit worried. What happened?
We were waiting for my brother, who was going to be the best man, Mike, and he was on British Railways, so he was a bit delayed because of the weather and stuff.
Not a very nice day for you, going away for a honeymoon?
Maybe. We haven't talked about it yet, you know. It's just, you know, we haven't really made any plans for a honeymoon. I think we will in a few days.
Mrs. McCartney, congratulations. What does it feel like to have married with one of the most eligible bachelors in the world, to the envy of all the ladies?
Well, it feels great to be married.
Linda and I used to say our greatest achievement was our children, you know, and looking at our other achievements, that was quite a strong statement we felt, you know. We wanted them to have their feet on the ground so that they wouldn't be sort of spoiled rich kids. So we did work at it a lot.
Linda took Paul to New York. They lived in a small apartment on the Upper East Side. The city became Paul's second home, and he was introduced to the Eastman's clients, like artist William de Kooning and poet Allen Ginsberg.
Linda had a little apartment in New York on Lexington and 83rd, which was a cool little residential area. And she and I used to just walk around New York a lot. And I had like a big beard and army surplice, sort of old Vietnam thing with the sergeant stripes and stuff. So I kind of looked like the guy who's going to mug you. So I didn't look like Beatle Paul at all. And it was a lot of material for music too. I had a song called She Came In Through the Bathroom Window, and I needed a verse for that. I was looking for verses when we were in the back of a New York taxi cab. And I just looked up and they have those little signs that tells you who the cab driver is. And this guy was called Eugene Quitz. So, and then it sort of said some number, it said New York Police Department. And so I quit the police department. You know, it just was like sitting there in front of me. The other side of that experience was Linda's family, who we'd sort of go and see like for dinner and stuff. And her dad was very well-to-do New York lawyer who had a great art collection in his apartment. And he had up these painters that I'd only just barely heard of or admired from afar, but he had them on his wall, you know? So you could be, it was like being in a gallery, really. You just would be sitting by them and chatting, and or be playing the piano or something, and these things would all be around.
These new influences on Paul showed themselves in the artwork he masterminded for the White Album. The cut-up montage of the poster contrasting with the minimalism of the sleeve itself. It followed the trend he'd started with the cover for Revolver. Now the White Album became the first record on the Beatles' own label, Apple.
And the beautiful people of London made their flower power way to Beatles, George and John's With It, Aladdin's Cave.
One day, my doorbell rang and there's Paul standing on the doorstep. So he says, got a name for the company. You like this? Apple. He said, what's the first thing a child is taught at school? He says, A is for Apple. We are the beginning.
Apple was far more of a success than people allow it, but the tales of excess and waste became true as the squabbling between the group members, and more specifically John and Paul, became worse. When the company had started, Paul travelled into the offices in Savile Row every day. But with his wish to have his father-in-law, John Eastman, rather than Alan Klein running the show overruled, he retreated to the studio.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to be philosophical in life, you know. You can let it gall you, but I try not to have too many regrets. I can look back on it and say, yeah, it would have been better. I think they were better managers than what we ended up with. And but I understand the worry of the other guys. It's my in-laws. You know, you don't want to bring in your in-laws because obviously they're going to favour me. And I'm sure that's what everyone was worried about. So they just got knocked out of the ballpark first meeting, really. Well, I kind of understood it.
Have you known right from the beginning that you didn't get on with Paul?
I knew that he had a problem because of his in-laws.
Do you think, is it a personal thing, do you think, or is it more a business problem that he has with you? I'm thinking of Mr. Eastman, his father-in-law.
Well, I think that it's a natural thing to probably, want your own family. And I think that's a problem, and that's his problem.
Do you like Paul?
I don't dislike him. I think he's a very talented fellow. I like him quite well.
You think?
What was good was because they were in the background on my side, they did help us sort it. They did find the right lawyers to get the company back. And even though I had to do it by suing the other Beatles, which was terrifying, when we did get the company back, you must understand, I got it back for them too. Didn't just come to me. They got their quarters of it too. And it's a good job, you know, because none of us would have anything. It would have just all fizzled away.
It is true to say that Alan's arrival certainly was the first step in the demise of Apple, and in many respects of the relationship between John and Paul.
The famous rooftop concert at Apple was designed as an attempt to get the Beatles together as a working band. The film and recording sessions that went on around the concert were anything but. They showed the backbiting and self-inflicted pain within the group. Morale was at an all-time low. McCartney named their last album after the place where he'd done his greatest work, Abbey Road. He designed the sleeve, organised the photo session. Incredibly, the photographer only took 6 stills on the zebra crossing, and one was perfect. And he put together the concept of the record. Again, it showed the divergence in the group. The first side reflected Lennon's desire for single tracks. The second side, McCartney's aim of creating a longer work, or medley. Sadly, he wanted the album to be called Everest towards its completion. But after the Abbey Road photos, no one could agree a date to take some new pictures or agree to fly to the Himalayas, so the idea sunk. Although Lennon hated it, the album remains the Beatles' biggest seller.
I just would have liked to see it go on just because we were good. And I knew we could have done masses more. But circumstances meant that we couldn't. It was just timing, again, fate. We got a very big sense of the circle having been completed. So much so that we did our last photo session for the album at the same place we'd done our first album.
The end had come about anyway within the group, having done the touring, having done Sgt. Pepper, and having made several more albums after that. The time had come. That group was bursting at the seams with talent, but it could not be contained within the seams of the group, is the point. It had to burst out and go its separate ways. And the 2 major talents that then lived on in their separate ways were inevitably John Lennon and Paul McCartney.
I'm proud of what I did, I'm proud I know what I did, and I really love it, and I think a lot of people know it and stuff. And I think nowadays it is coming round, where I'm just sort of shutting up and trying not to blow my own trumpet too much. And a few people are saying, well, but you did that, didn't you? No. I'm saying, well, yeah, I did, And so it's going to come out anyway. It can't be hidden. You can't suppress it. So that's the way I'd rather have it, because I don't want to be the guy who downed John in public, because I would never do that. He was too great. John's still my greatest hero. No doubt about it. I think he always will be.
Well, I'm sure Paul does miss John, because their partnership was a strange one, because it was built on love, but it was also built on rivalry. And since John's death, Paul has collaborated with different people, but it's never been quite the same.
I think the changing of the image of Paul McCartney began with the death of John and with all those books which followed, and the media naturally followed along with this and thought, oh, Paul McCartney was this sort of really softish guy. He was there, the nice guy behind the scenes, but John Lennon was the aggressive rebel. He was the innovator, whereas actual Paul was the innovator of the Beatles.
I think people do it for the right motives, because they were just so sad he died, you know, and you want to give him more and give him more than he was, perhaps, you know. But he himself, I heard him on a radio, actually, it was played on the day he died. We said, I don't want to be a martyr. Last thing I was probably to do with the bed-in stuff. But he did become that. And yeah, there was a big period of revisionism.
On December the 31st, 1970, the 60s came to an end when Paul McCartney sued for the appointment of a receiver for the Beatles' interests, and the Fab Four were no longer.
Oh yeah, it really hurt. It was one of the biggest hurts in my life, you know. It was, I was very keen on the Beatles. I didn't see why it shouldn't carry on. John, I think, mainly had become fed up with it. Really, he just wanted to do something else. He'd met Yoko, and I don't think he wanted to play with his little play friends anymore, you know. I did, you know, so when it was all dashed with the whole breaking up of Apple, it really hit me hard, you know, on a number of fronts. Your mates who you'd been all that time with, suddenly you weren't mates anymore. That's bad enough. This great company that had been such a great idealistic dream wasn't. It was now a nightmare. So that hit hard. And then, what are you going to do now? Was the big question. I ended up going off with Linda and the kids up to Scotland and just living in a cloud and the mist rolling in from the sea and just trying to figure out what I could do, you know, but it wasn't clear for a good few months.
Since the Beatles, Paul's achievements have been immense. He's written classics such as Maybe I'm Amazed and My Love. He's the only one of the Fab Four to get anywhere near the sales of the Beatles with another group, with the global success of Wings. He's embraced styles of music from trance to disco, via reggae and classical. And even now, 40 years on, he's still in the studio making albums and continuing to add to that amazing song catalogue. But of course, no one could ever have replicated the peak hit by the Beatles. There could never be another Revolver, White Album, Sgt. Pepper for any artist, let alone the man who created them the first time around. Time has also shown him to be the winner when it comes to business. His concept for Apple, although flawed, seemed to work when he made the journey in every day to Savile Row. When he stopped, the cocktail party raged unabated, without a hand on the rudder. Now his own company, MPL, is one of the world's most successful music publishers. He was also shown to be right over the Beatles song catalogue. Those numbers were lost to their composers forever when the other Beatles voted against him. That hasn't stopped the power of the music they created together. Paul has also left another legacy for the future. As well as his music, single-handedly he's formed the Liverpool Institute of Performing Arts, the much publicised Fame School.
My great feelings now is how proud my mum and dad would have been if they could have been here. But I won't get into that, I'll start crying. But keep at it. And even though, as Peter said, it was a hard day's night, we can work it out.
However, despite all it has achieved since 1970, it is the Beatles that have set the yardstick for his life's work. And although all the Beatles have collaborated with one another since the Fab Four split, the only ones who never got back are John and Paul.
Without John, it's different. You know, people say, why don't you reform the Beatles? And we always just say, well, there's one of us missing. You know, there's a basic problem. But while John was around, yeah, I would have always ideally liked it to happen. But, you know, there's people, you get moody with each other, you argue. When you're arguing, you know, it's like, oh. sod you, well, sod you, you know. You can't help that. It's 4 guys, you know. So I think the value is we've left a good legacy of sort of answers to eternal questions that are always going to be asked. I think that's one of the reasons it lasts. There's kids coming up now, and the guy's just got a new girlfriend, and they're wondering again, like we wondered, what do you do? What's it all about? And they hear the songs and go, that's not bad. That is the funny thing about fame, you know. You do just sort of look in the mirror and just think, oh, I, in this shell, am that guy I've read so much about. But I try and, I don't know whether it's a schizo thing, but I try and disassociate myself from him a bit. I try and be the kid I was when I was 5, grown up. So I'm like a father. I'm like just some guy who gets in a car and goes places and does interviews and works. And then Paul McCartney's the sort of successful bit of it all that I'm very proud of, but I don't imagine I'm him, because it would just blow my head off.